And I took, in fact, I think it was McGuire's regiment that Wentzloff gave to me, and I took it to a veterinarian, and the veterinarian looked at it, and he said, "This is unbelievable." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he says, "The amount of steroids that are being taken by whoever this is," he said, "is more than we would give to a racehorse, and horses weigh 1,500 pounds."
What's up, everybody? This is the Welcome to the Show podcast, brought to you by Audible. Go to audibletrial.com/welcome to the show to get a 30-day free trial and a free audiobook download. That's audibletrial.com/welcome to the show. Have you reviewed our podcast yet? Please take 2 minutes to rate and review the Welcome to the Show podcast wherever you listen. It helps to find our show. On today's episode, we speak to retired FBI agent of 31 years, Gregory Stejskal. Greg was the head of an undercover operation that the FBI took on in the late 1980s into the illegal use and sale of steroids. In this operation, some very interesting things were uncovered. A couple of Major League Baseball players were named in the probe. Major League Baseball was informed. And as we know, nothing happened. And as you also know, we saw what took place with the steroid era in baseball, which could have been prevented had Greg's warning been heeded. But without giving too much more away, let's take a listen at Gregory Stejskal. So I was reading through Tickle the Wire. And did you uncover the Robert Kraft controversy?
No.
Okay.
We had a similar case here in Michigan, and actually there was a nationwide initiative that our case became part of. But we shut down a bunch of spas and here Asian spas. And the whole purpose of that column was basically, I'm not sure why everybody's surprised that Asian spas are fronts for brothels, because we've known that for years. And, and my other criticism was the way they approached it, And it's similar to my criticism of the way some of the later cases approach steroids, going after Barry Bonds and stuff. Not that Barry Bonds should have been exposed, but to make him a criminal subject, he's nothing more than a user, just like A-Rod or any of these other guys. And in my case, it was McGuire and Canseco. Right. We didn't go after users; we went after the dealers. So that was the whole point of that. But anyway, go ahead.
So what's your take on how that operation, just to stick with the Asian spot thing real quick, I'm curious of your opinion. What's your take on how the operation was, I guess you can call it an operation, was handled in terms of outing people like Robert Kraft, and when there's so many other names that are out there who are apparently also millionaires and billionaires? But it almost felt like he was singled out. Not that I feel sorry for the guy, but what's your take on that?
My take is, and again, it goes back to if you want to address the problem, you go after the traffickers, the dealers, and in this case, the owners and purveyors of the brothels. And in our case, what we did, and I told, when the Ann Arbor police came to me with their case, I told them, I said, we can do a long-term investigation. I said, if you want to just shut these places down, go ahead and do it. But, we're not going to be involved on a federal level. What I want to do, and what you guys should want to do, is we go after these owners and end up forfeiting assets, shutting these places down, and prosecuting the owners for running these places. And they go to great lengths to distance themselves. They'll have the women sign independent contractor contracts and claim they have no knowledge of what's going on and all that kind of stuff. So that's what we did. And we didn't prosecute any Johns, and we didn't prosecute any of the women. We didn't even we didn't arrest the women. We didn't do any of that. We offered them social services and stuff. But what we did do is arrest and prosecute the owners, and all of them we prosecuted successfully. Not only that, we ended up, just in Ann Arbor, we seized about $2 million worth of assets, most of which went to the city of Ann Arbor. So that's the way you shut down spas. To this day, there are no Asian spas in the city of Ann Arbor. So, and that was that case went down in about 2000. So we're talking about almost 20 years, and still no Asian spas. Now, we got them in other counties and stuff, but we don't have them here. So
that's interesting. So
and again, the thing with Kraft, and I'm reticent to criticize their case, not knowing more about it, but it looks to me like they're prosecuting the Johns and trying to get publicity by basically showing videos, and that's not the way you do the case if you want to get the owners and stuff. Now, maybe they've got evidence on the owners, but my guess is they don't. They just have videos and stuff. So
how much do you think how much do you think
ahead.
this, not to get political, we're not really a political podcast, but how much do you think that Asian spa, specifically the owner's connection to Trump, has something to do with that? That it almost seems like You mean
Kraft's connection to Trump?
Kraft's connection to Trump, and also the spa owner apparently has some sort of connection to Trump
the woman,
as well.
Well, she apparently was. I suspect. I don't know. I really can't say because I would just be speculating. I don't think, at least in Kraft's case, that there was anything, and I'm not even sure they knew. This woman supposedly sold the spas, although I'm a little skeptical of that. I suspect maybe she's got a hidden interest, but again, I'm just speculating. So, but I would just say based, I doubt that, for example, Kraft was targeted because he's a friend of Trump's. He was targeted because he's a known person, and they knew they could get a lot of publicity. And quite frankly, prosecutors are political animals. Most of them are either elected or appointed, and they have an interest in getting as much publicity as they can. And the same was true with going after Barry Bonds. The Northern District of California, when we had Equine and we took down Kurt Wentzloff, who was Conseco and McGuire's dealer. When we took him down, the Northern District of California had no interest in pursuing a steroid case. When we did that. Later, they went after Barry Bonds and stuff, and of course, it was a mess. And Bonds, got a slap on the wrist, and again, he was just a user. What they should have been doing, but they wanted the publicity. And, we could have done the same thing. We could have, trumpeted the fact that, this guy's the dealer for Conseco and McGuire and stuff. And, of course, that stuff came out later, but not at the time when we were prosecuting the cases. If we had put that out, I'm sure we would have gotten a lot more publicity for the case, but that's not what we were trying to do.
So Greg, why do you think they weren't interested in pursuing any kind of prosecution on McGuire's?
We had the problem at that time. We had the same problem all the way through. Even though it had been made, steroids had been made a Schedule III drug, and that trafficking was a felony. Even the Department of Justice, we were reluctant to pursue the case, and I had a hard time getting the Bureau headquarters to pursue the case. We ended up pursuing the case not as a drug case, but as a fraud against the government case, because steroids were available as a prescription drug. My argument was, after I couldn't get the drug people to be interested in it, I got the fraud against the government unit interested because we said they were circumventing the prescription system, and so we opened it under a fraud against the government classification, not as a drug case, even though we prosecuted it as a drug case. So, and then when we wanted a wiretap on one of our dealers, a guy ironically named Joe DiMaggio.
Wow.
He was a big dealer here. And when we went to get a wiretap on the case, Department of Justice came back and said, well, we're not sure we want to do a wiretap on a steroid case. And fortunately, the U.S. attorney, my assistant U.S. attorney that was working with me, said, that's not your call. Either we've got the probable cause to do it or not. It's not for you to decide what cases we're going to. So we got authorization for it, and it turned out really well because we seized a ton of steroids from this guy and a bunch of other stuff. But at any rate, that's the kind of thing that we were dealing with early on in this case. We couldn't get anybody interested.
Wow. Okay, so let me just rewind a little bit so that our audience knows what exactly we're talking about. So we're speaking with Gregory Stejskal. Did I say it right that time?
You said Stejskal right, but you can just go with Greg. So.
Oh, Greg, I'm sorry. So he served as an FBI agent for 31 years and is currently retired. On TickleTheWire.com, where you can find some of his columns, it says that he's a resident agent in charge of the Ann Arbor office. We're going to get back to Operation Equine real quick, but I just wanted to ask you, what exactly is a resident agent? What does that mean?
Well, in the Bureau, you've got field offices like Detroit, New York, Chicago, or whatever. Detroit covers the Detroit field office covers Michigan, and then they have satellite offices, branch offices. Mm-hmm. And in Michigan's case, we've got a branch office in Ann Arbor. There's another one in Lansing, Traverse City. And we refer to those satellite or branch offices as resident agencies. And so that's Ann Arbor was a resident agency of the Detroit office.
Hmm. Okay, and so
that's what it means.
Okay, gotcha. And then, so what we were discussing previously, before I interrupted with that question, was Operation Equine, which, to my understanding, you proposed this to the FBI, and what inspired it? Why did you want to conduct this inspiration? This operation. Sorry.
That's all right. So I'm in the Ann Arbor resident office, which actually covers 5 counties, not just Ann Arbor. But one of my jobs was I had liaison with the athletic department at the University of Michigan, and early on in my career, in 1982, Bo Schembechler, the football coach at the University of Michigan, contacted the FBI and wanted to have some agents come and speak to his teams about issues. And at that time, one of the primary issues was sports gambling, illegal mm-hmm. sports gambling. And so I went over in 1982 and started talking to the team, and that continued every year thereafter for 30-some years. But I think it was 1988, and I believe it was late in 1988, that Bo Schembechler called me. We had, become, I guess, friends. And Bo called me and said, hey, I've got something I need to talk to you about, if you could come over. And I said, sure. And I came over, and he said, and when I met with him in his office, Mike Gittleson, who was his strength and conditioning coach, was also there. And Bo asked me, he said, hey, what the steroids are a federal felony. He knew that, and the trafficking of steroids. And he said, what's being done about that? And I said, Bo, I don't know, but I'll try and find out. And so I learned that it was of course, a felony, but also learned that nothing was being done. DEA wasn't doing anything. The Bureau wasn't doing anything. So I got back with Bo, and he said, well, we have information that a lot of college football players are doing steroids. And he says it's become pretty pervasive. And the example he said we had information that a number of the teams that we play, a lot of guys are doing steroids. And he also said, when we do our summer camps, when we've got high school athletes in here, we have high school football players asking us when they should start doing steroids, not whether they should start doing them, but when they should start doing them. In other words, they just considered a foregone conclusion that they need to do steroids. And Bo said, this is, getting to be scary. And I agreed with him. So I went back and did a little research and proposed an undercover operation, a sort of a limited undercover operation to go after steroid dealing in our area in Michigan. And I got a little bit of pushback from the Bureau, and they said, well, you can do what we called a Class 1 steroid investigation, but that only lasts for 6 months, and you got limited resources and everything. So I said, well, all right, if that's what I got. So I recruited an undercover agent. We started doing some stuff, and it went pretty slow, but we started getting some leads and things. But by the time we were really starting to make a little bit of progress, it was coming up on that 6-month thing, and we were basically thinking, well, we're just going to have to shut this down. We've identified a few small dealers, but that was about it. And then I got a call from headquarters, and they said, when are you putting in for an extension on this undercover operation on your Group 1? And I said, you told me not to put in for an extension. They said, well, not only do we want you to put in for an extension, we want you to raise it up to a Group 1 as opposed to a Group 2 is what we had, and we want you to, which meant we had unlimited time and a lot more assets, resources at our disposal. So we went ahead and put in for it. And apparently the reason for that was the White House had made an inquiry of the Bureau and DEA and wanted to know what we were doing about steroids. That was George H.W. Bush was in the White House at that time. And the only active steroid case in the entire United States was ours. So they told me to put together a Group 1 proposal, and I did. And, the rest, I guess, is history. We codenamed the case Equine, because a lot of the steroids that were being used at that time were veterinary drugs meant for horses, and and that's how it got started. And from there it took off, and we ended up, prosecuting 70-some dealers, and worked with did a lot of stuff in Canada and a little bit in Mexico and all over the United States. So that's how it all started.
The way I'm picturing this, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you've ever watched this movie. Have you ever seen the recent version of 21 Jump Street?
Yeah, I love that movie.
So I
didn't. I saw the trailers and stuff, but I never actually saw the movie. No.
So it's a I know that this isn't funny. It's not a funny topic, but it's a comedy about two undercover cops who go into high school to try to. I think it's to thwart drug use or something.
It's a new drug that's on the streets, and they have to go to high school to find it or something.
All right. So is this what we're looking at here?
Yeah.
Is this what we're looking at here with your undercover agent that you recruited? I'm just trying to paint a picture for the audience. I don't want to make it a joke.
Well,
it's just
sure. No, I understand, and believe me, we had our share of laughs and stuff during this thing. But the guy I recruited was a guy I knew. We were both on the SWAT team together, and this was a guy that knew his way around a gym and did some weightlifting. In fact, I recruited 2 guys, but one of them became the main undercover agent. The other guy was sort of his backup, but. These were guys that I knew could pull this off, but they were also older, and of course we didn't want them to really use steroids. So their undercover story was that they were from Chicago. Both of them were from Chicago originally, so they could do that. And they basically would tell the guys that they were doing surveys and stuff, retail surveys and stuff, so they traveled a lot. That way they could go to a lot of different gyms, and nobody expected them to be going to one gym all the time. And they said, we're starting up a gym back in Chicago, and I want to be able to have access to steroids for some of the guys, some of our customers. And so that was their line, and it worked out pretty well.
So, Greg, this is more like a curious personal question, but you're you're undercover. Is that something that you kind of work at your own slow pace, or do you kind of force things to try to happen? Like I'm just seen a lot of, I've seen a lot of movies of cops undercover. I'm just curious what that's really like.
Well, a lot of it's a judgment call, and it takes a certain amount of the guys that do it. They have to have a certain amount of chutzpah and the ability to play act and get into a role. And a lot of it is, they have to determine based on who they're talking to and stuff, how to play it. In other words, some guys, you can push them a little bit. Other guys, you just have to take your time and develop a trust and stuff. And you basically, in fact, my undercover guy was a guy by the name of Bill Randall, and that's out there. Discovery Channel did a story about our case, but he was the undercover, the main undercover guy, and he basically would say, yeah, I'm a bit of a con man, and that's what you have to be in order to be a successful undercover guy, because you have to con the bad guys. So
yeah,
that's
wow.
And he was very good at it, and so it worked out well.
That is interesting. So to my understanding, the sale and use of steroids, didn't that become a felony at some point in the 80s?
Yeah, and I believe that was right around the late 80s as well. And Bo told me at the time, and I never really checked this out, but I'm assuming it's right, and I think he told me this anyway, that he actually testified in front of Congress regarding making steroids a felony.
Wow.
But that was in, I believe that statute was passed in 88 or 89. I can't remember for sure when, which would have been about the same time that, I had that meeting with Bo.
So could that be why at the time it seemed like it wasn't, like people weren't making a big deal out of it in terms of not wanting to prosecute steroid users or sellers, or was it just
But that is part of it, because but you have to remember too, DEA and the Bureau, to the extent that we work drugs, I mean, DEA, that's what they do, and in the Bureau we did it, but we only did it at the upper echelons. But both of them, they were working heroin and cocaine cases, and they just didn't view steroids as being a significant problem. Not the way that cocaine and heroin were. So, right. and it was primarily cocaine at that time. There was some heroin, but it was more cocaine than heroin. But at any rate, that's what they were targeting, and to them, steroids was kind of a foreign thing, and they just, rather, I would try to educate them, but it didn't make much difference. They had these, they were focused on that, and you only have a limited amount of resources, so you do what you can do. And even with our case, we never really had the kind of resources that you have in some cases. I mean, I was a case agent. I was doing all kinds of stuff. I had one undercover guy. A lot of times we'd have to beg for surveillance on some of our stuff. So, and like I say, we had to push hard to get that Title III on the one dealer. The Title III being a wiretap on his phone and everything. We had to push hard to get that because the Bureau just said, we're not sure we want to do that, and Department of Justice said the same thing.
So. When you get this level 3 wiretap, I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, but at this point, was this already getting to the point that it had reached like the Major League Baseball part of it, or were you still working the smaller high school case?
Keep in mind, Equine was an undercover operation. Within Equine, within this operation, there were numerous subjects who were dealers, but they weren't necessarily related. Some of them were, like in DiMaggio's case, he had a number of sub-dealers, and that was one group. The guy that was the Major League Baseball connection was a guy by the name of Kurt Wensloff, who had ties to Michigan but was living in Oakland, California. And Wensloff had become acquainted with Canseco and then subsequently with McGuire. And he was supplying Canseco and McGuire with their steroids when they were both playing for the Oakland A's. And that was the Major League Baseball connection. Our guys back in Michigan, we had a couple dealers, that one guy in particular who was supplying Michigan State University athletes and some other guys. And, you know, we had dealers, some of them which were primarily just supplying guys that were in bodybuilding and stuff like that. A few guys that were getting involved in professional wrestling. But, you know, it kind of ran the gamut. But as far as the Major League Baseball connection, it was primarily Kurt Wenzloff out in Northern California.
And were Canseco and McGuire aware that the FBI was aware that they were abusing steroids?
Not till later.
Not until later.
Yeah, and one of the reasons, and again, I may be speculating here a little bit, but the timing is such that it would appear to be the case. Obviously McGuire denied it for a long period of time, or refused to even respond. And then when he was being considered to be a batting coach for the St. Louis Cardinals.
Yeah.
And he was, I can't remember what he was doing at the time, but, you know, he had appeared before Congress but never really answered the questions and stuff. And I had retired from the Bureau, but I was approached by a couple journalists and said, hey, how do you feel about McGuire becoming the batting coach for the Cardinals? And I said, well, you know, he was a steroid abuser. And I said, you know, and he's never admitted it and never had appeared to have any contrition for what he did or anything like that. So I said, I guess it doesn't seem like he's the guy that should be coaching these guys when he was a user of steroids and never really admitted it or took responsibility for it. Mm-hmm. Right after that, he came out and admitted that he was using steroids. And
I remember that.
You know,
yeah.
And that's when he admitted he was using them, when he broke Maris's record. And supposedly, and I presume it's true, that he apologized to the Maris family. But then he would make comments like, yeah, well, I took steroids, but they really didn't help me. And I'm kind of thinking, all right, then why did you apologize to Maris's family if you didn't think they really helped you?
I remember he said that about the his rookie season where he hit like 50, I think, or something, right? It was like he had like the rookie record for most until Aaron Judge broke it the other year. But yeah, I do remember him saying that was all him at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And you know, all you have to do is look at pictures of guys like McGuire, and it doesn't. You know.
I don't know if you've seen Billy Corben's latest movie, Screwball. Have you heard of it or seen it yet?
I've heard of it. I haven't actually seen it. That's the one about the biogenesis. Right?
So he delves into steroid abuse in baseball briefly in it, and there's one particular scene where he transforms Mark McGuire and Jose Canseco from their body build when they first broke into the league, and up to the point where I guess Mark McGuire was 1998 and Jose Canseco was, I guess, like an 88 or something, where he kind of looked like the Incredible Hulk, and you see like the clear difference in their body, their heads, everything is completely different. But my next question for you was, since we're sticking with this, I do have a follow-up, but when did McGuire and Canseco, to your knowledge, become aware that they were the subject of an FBI investigation? Not the subject, but that they were part of it, I guess.
Well, you know, Canseco had come out and wrote that book, that tell-all book, and started outing, you know, a number of people, some of which, you know, he may have been speculating. But about that time, there were congressional hearings and stuff, and it was 2005, and there was a hearing in front of Joe Biden, and Grassley, the senator out of Iowa. And they did a hearing on steroids, and one of the staff people contacted me and arranged, he wanted to know if we could get Kurt Wenzloff to testify in front of the congressional hearing. And I said, well, I'll ask him and see. So I talked to Kurt, and we were on good terms because, he trusted me and everything, even though we prosecuted him. But he agreed to do it. So he testified in front of the Senate hearing, and after that, he was interviewed by Christian Red from the New York Daily News, and Wenzloff, told him that he had been prosecuted by the FBI and everything, and they said, well, you just told this congressional hearing about supplying, Major League Baseball players. Did the FBI ever advise Major League Baseball? And Wenzloff says, well, yeah, I think they did, but I don't know for sure. And so they contacted my U.S. attorney here that worked the case with us, and he referred them to me. And so I get a call from Christian Red and a couple of the other guys that were working on New York Daily News on their sports investigative team. And they asked me about it. They said, did you ever tell Major League Baseball? Well, when you're contacted by the media, sometimes you're supposed to just say no comment. But in this case, they were referred to me by the U.S. attorney. So I just said, yeah, we told Major League Baseball. And they asked me who, and I told them that who I had contacted in their security office and stuff. And so they said, well, what did Major League Baseball tell you? And I said, well, they told me that they were aware of some of the stuff, but that there wasn't much they could do about it, and the players wouldn't let them test at that time. And that was in summer of '94 when they told Major League Baseball, and I said, they were in the midst of a strike and everything. So, but to the best of my knowledge, nothing happened from it.
That's crazy.
And,
I want to continue on with this, because this is where, for me, things are the alarm should be going off, and people should start to realize that baseball knew what was happening prior to all these home run records being broken. But before we get to that, I just want to point out, according to your piece on TickleTheWire.com, Curtis Wenzloff was it 1992 that you guys tried to have him prosecuted?
Well, we did. We prosecuted him federally,
but
he also was cooperative. So he was able to cut a deal and stuff. So
but
yeah, we did prosecute him.
I know that this is speculation, but would you assume that he would have informed these players, or they might have taken notice that, hey, this guy's, he's busted, we're caught. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, that I really don't know the answer. I don't know whether, how much they were aware of it or how much they were following it. It got Equine got a little bit of national publicity, but I'm not sure how many people were following the story or knew. Yeah. And like I said, we took down. It was actually done in two phases, and the first one got a lot of publicity. The second one, not so much. But and I think Wenzloff was prosecuted in the first group. But the point is, unless you were reading closely and stuff, you probably wouldn't have even known who the subjects in the case were at that time. It wasn't until later, like I say, with the hearing in front of the Senate subcommittee, that I think media became aware of the case and the fact that Wenzloff had been supplying Major League Baseball players.
Wow. I was going to ask that in your, in all the evidence that you collected, all the different dealers that you came to know, did this ever branch out into other lanes that were in Major League Baseball, like other sports or anything? Other professional sports?
I couldn't say that we actually identified any other specific players. I mean, we were aware, obviously, and Wenzloff was aware that other players were using his stuff. In fact, he told us that, Canseco was purchasing steroids, and he was purchasing at levels that were far beyond what you would ordinarily, what one person could use. So Canseco himself was probably supplying other players. I doubt that he was doing it for profit. It was more, hey, I got a source. I can get you this stuff. So that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what it sounded like in his book, Juiced. It sounded like he was like the go-to guy in baseball. Like, hey, this is what I'm doing, guys.
Well, yeah, he was, I think, ahead of the curve in the sense that, he was doing it early on and
Yeah.
knew there were probably a few others that were as well. And of course, McGuire got in, I think, because of Canseco,
Yeah.
but at any rate, that was early in the thing, and then it just kind of went from there.
Yeah. And so you informed Major League Baseball around 1994, and
August of '94, and the reason I know that is because I told you I used to make the presentations to the football team here, and I made them to other teams and other sports, professional sports and stuff like that. And we were back for what we call an in-service for training back at Quantico. And I'm blanking on a name here, Hallahan, but I can't remember his first name.
Kevin
He was
Hallahan.
head of security at Kevin Hallahan. He was back representing Major League Baseball, and there were people from NBA, NHL, NFL, and some NCAA people. Anyway, we're having this big sort of a seminar kind of thing. And I was up in what they call the boardroom, which is just kind of a bar at Quantico, and a bunch of us were sitting at a table, and I got in a conversation with Hallinan, and that's when I was telling him about the steroid stuff. And I had written an article for the Law Enforcement Bulletin, which is the FBI magazine, and I had written this big article about steroids, and I showed it to the guys at the seminar. And then, so we got into this conversation about steroids, and that's when I told him about it, what we knew. So
yeah, and
that's
so
when I first gave him the heads up.
Yeah. So when was Operation Equine concluded officially?
Well, I think we've pretty much finished prosecuting all the cases in '95.
Okay.
So it was the undercover portion of the case was pretty much shut down. I believe sometime in '93. I believe towards the end of '93 was the last undercover stuff we did, and then we prosecuted a lot of the cases. And I think we only went to trial in one case, and that was in Canada. So the rest of them all pled guilty. So
yeah, and so from '93 to '95 in that area, you start to see in 1998 Mark McGuire and Sammy Sosa start crushing home runs in unprecedented levels. And it just so happens to be Mark McGuire, one of the guys that you uncovered, was using steroids back in the 80s. They hit 60 or more home runs. I think McGuire did it again the next year. Sammy did it 2 more times after that. What's going on through your mind? Like, did you feel like saying something, or were you not allowed to,
Well, I certainly couldn't go to the media and just say, "Hey, geez, I think some of these guys are doing steroids."
Is that because it was sealed? Was it not able to come out?
No, it's because the only two that we knew for sure were doing steroids. I mean, we suspected obviously a bunch of them did, but the only two that we Seiko and McGuire, because we had arrested their dealer. But so other than telling Major League Baseball about McGuire and Canseco, we couldn't specifically identify any athletes, and I certainly couldn't go to the media and even talk about Canseco and McGuire. You just in the FBI you can't do that. As a private citizen, I suppose you could go do it, but I couldn't do it in the bureau because that would be you just can't do it.
Yeah.
You can prove a case in court, but you don't go to the media and tell people, "Hey, I know these guys are doing steroids."
Yeah,
or,
of
I know
course.
these guys are robbing banks. If you don't prosecute them, so
could anybody have, say I was a journalist at the time, I was in 8th grade, could I have found this information somewhere with names and all that stuff?
No.
No. Okay.
No, because none of that would have been public information until Wensloff testified in front of that congressional hearing.
And that was in 2004, you said, or 2005?
2005.
2005.
I think it was summer of 2005.
Okay.
Greg, actually,
And there's some stories
go
in
ahead.
the Daily News about the congressional hearing.
I feel like we should have asked this question in the beginning, but are you yourself a fan of baseball or not?
Well, I'm more of a football fan.
Okay. Do you? I mean, we see guys in football get busted sometimes. Do you have any opinion on that, or does it bother you that pro athletes are still to this day probably using anything?
Oh yeah, it bothers me.
Yeah, it bothers me too, kind of. But I don't know. I don't know what to believe anymore. I feel like it's everywhere, and if this is what it is, maybe we should just accept it. I know that's the wrong way of thinking about it, but I just don't know anymore.
Yeah. So, and again, I mean, I think anymore, it's most people that know anything about it. You can tell who's doing them and who isn't.
Yeah.
And, but, again, that's not proof. I mean, certainly not proof enough that you can say anything about it. And unless somebody tests positive or something like that. So,
So I know we're flip-flopping back and forth a lot, but I just wanted to clarify one thing. So you informed Kevin Hallinan, who at the time was the head of security for Major League Baseball. He then went on to become, I believe, the head of the Department of Investigations after the Mitchell report.
right.
Would you happen to know if Kevin Hallinan, would he have kept that to himself, or would he have informed, I guess at the time it was Bud Selig, what was the commissioner of baseball? Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe that was before the Selig era.
No, it was Bud Selig, and
okay.
And when the fecal matter hit the oscillating machine,
the oscillator,
yeah, when this whole thing came down, when I was contacted by the Daily News in 2005, Hallinan initially denied it all, said, I don't even know that guy, which, wasn't true because I had more than one contact with Hallinan.
Mm-hmm.
But in addition to that, and Selig claimed that, they didn't know anything about it and they were more interested, I guess, in covering their ass than anything else. Then they took the position that, well, we never knew anything about it. This is all news to us and everything. So I can't remember exactly what you asked me, but.
Oh, I had asked you. Could you speculate? I guess if Selig was informed, if baseball in general knew.
Well, the only thing I can say is that I've got to believe that he was aware of it, based on what Kevin told me at Quantico when I first told him about it.
Yeah.
He said, we know that steroids are being used by some of these guys, but they don't want us to test at that time, and of course they're going through the strike and all that, but. Like I say, I've got to believe that information was transmitted to Bud Selig. I can't believe that it wasn't, but I have no way of knowing that for sure.
Right, and just baseball's track record with handling these kinds of things would tell you that they were informed, and it continues to this day with Rob Manfred. But that's neither here nor there, I guess. So how did you feel? How did you feel when you saw Bud Selig being inducted into baseball's Hall of Fame? I mean, do you feel like he deserved to get the highest honor in baseball, or what's your opinion in that?
Well, the steroid era was probably in some ways was worse than anything that has happened in baseball, to include when the Cubs threw the World Series. So, or I guess it was the White Sox threw the World Series, but it was something like that. But
both in Chicago.
At any rate, so the steroid era, is going to have lasting effects forever, because so much of baseball has to do with statistics and everything, and now everything's skewed. Nobody really knows, and there's going to be a lot of players that aren't going to get into the Hall of Fame because of their use of steroids. And yet Bud Selig, who basically figured, it's better to cover this stuff up, and they were putting a lot of people in the seats to see these guys hit all these home runs. So I have mixed emotions about it. Obviously my opinion doesn't mean much, but I think, especially since Selig has never taken responsibility for, hey, maybe we should have, done more than we did.
Yeah, with the biogenesis situation, it was out there. It was uncovered because of this whistleblower in Porter Fisher. And instead of taking ownership of it, baseball kind of took the same tack that they did with Barry Bonds, which is to find a scapegoat. And with biogenesis, it was Alex Rodriguez, although he's by no means an innocent bystander. With Bud Selig, it was Barry Bonds, early on. And you had mentioned that you had brought this to the attention of Major League Baseball, and I guess whoever was in San Francisco, and they didn't want to prosecute, but then later on, the Balco case became a huge story.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Again, well, because then it was then the media had the full attention, and everybody now knew about steroids, and they see an opportunity to get a lot of media attention and everything else. And that's the only reason, you go after somebody like Bonds. I mean, what you should be doing, like I say, on any of these cases, is going after the dealers. Now, if you find out that players are doing this, then they should be disciplined. But I'm not sure you go after them criminally. I mean, we never prosecuted any users, and just because a guy is a prominent professional athlete doesn't mean he should be criminally prosecuted as a user. In order to just get media attention, which to me is exactly what they were trying to do. Now, is it a better deterrent? Well, maybe you can argue that, but so would be if the guy gets disciplined and suspended, like Rodriguez was. So
right. Yeah, and Rodriguez was also, he had to hand over information to the Department of Justice, because he was facing criminal charges as well.
Right.
That whole situation was just crazy. I would suggest watch that movie Screwball. It's a funny take on the whole situation, but it does.
The book
by Elfrink, Bloodsport.
Yeah, Elfrink. I mean, it reads like one of Hyacinth's books, or Elmore Leonard.
Exactly.
That kind of stuff. A bunch of the gang that couldn't shoot straight or something. So.
I mean, it was insane, and the reason we wanted to have you on because of your knowledge of this, and because of your involvement in Operation Equine. I mean, you're the creator of it, So, is there anything else that we didn't cover here that you feel we should talk about more?
As far, the case, I could probably write a book. Maybe someday I will, if I don't die first. But it was an interesting case. It was a unique case, and it's still the most successful steroid trafficking case in history. I mean, you could look at biogenesis and you can look at Belcor, but we didn't only shut down one dealer. We shut down like I said, we prosecuted over 70 dealers, but
Yeah.
and the amount of steroids that we seized and all of that. But so no, I think you've covered most of it, especially the Major League Baseball aspects of it. So I don't know that there's much I could add to that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you guys, for those of you listening, you can find Greg Stejskal's pieces, his columns, his articles on ticklethewire.com. Thank you so much for coming on our show, and we hope you'll come again soon. I'm sure we're going to have more questions after this. We love talking to you.
Well, thanks, Manny. I've enjoyed it, and I was a mediocre college athlete. My son was a college athlete, and one of the reasons I got involved in this case was because of what Bo told me about high school athletes, asking them when they should start doing steroids, and educating myself and being aware of what the damage that steroids can do, and growth hormone as well. I thought it was important that this issue should be addressed before. And it's unfortunate that it got to the level that it did, but I feel like we at least made a dent, and I think it was something important that needed to be done.
Yeah, and I don't want to speak for CT, but I think we share the same opinion in that it's not necessarily that we're full on against steroid use. It's using it responsibly, and it's using it, through a medical physician if needed. And the thing is, when you abuse steroids illegally without a prescription, without a doctor's knowledge, suicide rates are up among steroid users. You're messing with your body, with your body's chemistry, and it's just not good for you. And you hear a lot of really heartbreaking stories of high school kids, committing suicide and suffering from severe depression, and this operation was really important, and thank you for doing that. Thank you for taking that on, and thank you for your service in the FBI as well.
Well, thanks. And I just a comment that as I said early on, the reason we called the case Equine was because a lot of the steroids of choice were stuff like Winstrol V and Equipoise, which are both veterinary drugs meant for horses.
Jesus.
And I took, in fact, I think it was McGuire's regimen that Wentzloff gave to me, and I took it to a veterinarian, and the veterinarian looked at it, and he said, "This is unbelievable." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he says, "The amount of steroids that are being taken by whoever this is," he said, "is more than we would give to a racehorse."
Oh my
and
God.
Horses weigh 1,500 pounds.
My
and
God.
I said, "Wow." And the point being, in order to get the performance-enhancing effects of steroids, I mean, it's one thing to take small amounts to raise your testosterone level, but to get the performance-enhancing results that you have to take huge amounts of steroids. And then what happens is your body quit naturally making testosterone. And when your body quits making it, sometimes it'll start up again, sometimes it won't. And a lot of these guys that have abused steroids now have to take testosterone supplements because their body no longer makes it. And when your body isn't making testosterone, then you go into depression.
Yeah.
That can cause suicide and a lot of other things. So these are some of the aspects, that people, maybe don't know up front. A lot of times these athletes think, well, I'm going to live forever, and none of this stuff is, there's only an upside. This is going to help me.
No, not just that. Not just that. Think about that. We CT and I spoke about this on our last episode. A player like Melky Cabrera is a subpar baseball talent prior to his use of steroids. When he started taking I shouldn't say steroids because I'm not sure exactly what he was taking, but when he started taking performance-enhancing drugs, his performance escalated to a level that was unbelievable, and he got a multi-million-dollar contract out of it. You know what I mean? So the incentive is there for these players to do it, and
if you don't enforce it, if you don't do testing, and you have to do things beyond testing, believe me, because steroids are out of your system too often in a very relatively short period of time. So testing by itself isn't enough. You've got to do more than that. But at any rate, the fact of the matter is, if people see that guys are doing steroids and getting away with it, then it puts pressure on everybody to do steroids.
Right.
And then it becomes a point where, okay, if I want to play at this level, I guess I'm going to have to do steroids. And that gets back to Bo's argument. So,
and that also touches on our conversation with Nick Francona. It's all connected. That in international players in the Dominican Republic and in Cuba and in Puerto Rico, some of these players feel the need to use performance enhancers to get out of their situation. And like I said before, we're seeing that once they reach the big league level, they're almost incentivized to do it. They might get a slap in the hand, a 50-game punishment or whatever, but by that point, they already got their multi-year, multi-million-dollar contract. They're set for life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I don't know how we fix it. I think it's going to continue because, you have doctors like Tony Bosch down in Miami, Florida, who's back in business, and he knows how to hide these things.
Yep.
And
there are, like I say, the stuff can be out of your system relatively quickly. I think
exactly.
Within at least 72 hours, it's going to be out of your system. And these guys are cycling on and off, so if they time their cycles right and stuff, they won't get caught. And again, that's why you have to do stuff, not only testing, which is sort of a reactive kind of thing. You've got to do proactive investigations and stuff. And that was why Major League Baseball was encouraged to set up an investigative group that was sort of independent to do these kind of things and develop informants. And you can do that, but, it has to have the support of, the commissioner and everything else. And I'm not sure that's there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Greg. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And we'd love to have you on again and talk about this a little bit more. Thanks.
Happy to do
it.
Sure.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening. If you haven't done so already, please leave a review and a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcast. It helps listeners to find our show. Thank you to Greg for coming on the show. That was phenomenal. You provided us with a lot of information. Thanks everybody for listening. Peace.